Hey there, Holiday Show listeners. Aaron Nabus here, and we welcome back Jason Inman and Ashley Victoria Robinson. We last had Jason on episode 69, where he talked about his incredible book called Super Soldiers, a salute to comic book heroes and villains who fought for their country. And who can't forget our first conversation on episode 8 that was recorded at a diner where we first met Jason and Ashley, where they talked about the first volume of the graphic novel Jupiter Jet. But on episode 95 of The Holiday Show, we welcome back both Jason and Ashley to talk about the second volume of Jupiter Jet called Jupiter Jet and the Forgotten Radio, which arrives at stores. It's on October 7th, 2020, I believe, right?
That is correct. And by the way, Aaron, thank you so much for having us back. And I wanted to say that we had pancakes this morning in anticipation of this podcast, because I don't feel it's quite the Hall H show unless we're recording it in a diner.
Oh, well, I look forward until, when we can do that for real next some other time in the future.
Yeah, for real.
And it's also available on pre-order right now. So make sure you guys go pre-order.
Yeah, if people are not familiar, pre-orders, especially for comics and especially for independently published books, have a lot to do with the health and the future of the book. So if you like us, if you trust Aaron's taste, and I mean, why wouldn't you? Obviously, we do. We've been here many times.
We've seen what he orders in a diner.
It's true. We often hug our bodies to his body when that is safe to do at conventions. Then if people would consider pre-ordering Jupiter Jet and the Forgotten Radio, Jason and I would be very grateful.
Conventions.
Sigh.
Famous comic book writer Ron Mars has already read it and has said, quote, "You had me at Jetpack. I know a little something about building heroes, and this is how you do it, with heart and humor and high adventure." Welcome back to the show, Jason and Ashley. And how stoked were you when Ron said those awesome words about Jupiter Jet and the Forgotten Radio?
So the place where Ashley and I are recording this in our home right now, directly over the desk is a retailer poster from Green Lantern number 51, the first appearance of Kyle Rayner as written by Ron Mars and drawn by Darryl Banks. Kyle Rayner's always been one of my favorite comic book characters. And when we were, part of the process when you're writing a book is, you query other authors. And I was like, you know what? We've had some loose contacts with Ron Mars here and there at various conventions. I'm gonna shoot for the moon and see if he'll give us a quote. And he did, and he enjoyed the book. And he loved it. So as soon as he sent that quote, I was like, this has to be our front cover quote, because it just means the world to me. It's quite astounding that Ron would humble himself to enjoy Jupiter Jet so much.
Awesome. And without giving away too much, can you tell our audience what they can expect in the second volume?
So Jupiter Jet and the Forgotten Radio picks up exactly 1 year after the events of Jupiter Jet. So I'm going to say a spoiler for Volume 1 because the book is 3 years old, so that's on you, listeners. At the end of Volume 1, Jupiter Jet learns that she is not on 1930s Earth, but she is in fact on Europa, which is a moon of Jupiter. And so in this volume, we wanted to explore everything that means and literally take her to heights and different worlds that she has never been to before. She's a year older now, so she is 17, and we all remember being 17. You're practically an adult. You know what's going on in the world. And this volume is really a lot about exploring that you're never as mature as you think you are, and you have to learn the correct approach to things. And we try to do that through fun things that we love. Jason loves Western, so we go to a Western planet. And there's a huge, huge Easter egg when we leave the Western planet to return to Europa. But so this volume is really exploring who we are as writers, because there's been a lot of projects that Jason and I have done since Volume 1, which was our first ongoing original series, and now, and exploring what Jackie is like now that she's been Jupiter Jet for a little while.
If Jupiter Jet Volume 1 was the origin of the Amazing Spider-Man, then Jupiter Jet Volume 2 really is almost Daredevil born again. And if you're a deep cut comic book nerd, you get that reference.
Now, Jupiter Jet, The Forgotten Radio wasn't the original working title. What other titles were you thinking about?
So some of the other titles we were thinking about was all based around, there's a new element in Jupiter Jet, a red rock, a mysterious red rock. And so originally it was just called, one of the titles was Jupiter Jet and the Red Rocks. And another one was Jupiter Jet and the Mystery of the Red Element. And the Forgotten Radio was always a big part of this storyline. Jupiter Jet's younger brother discovers this long-lost radio in a hidden laboratory as part of one of his, the B-plot, you could say, of the book. And even though it's not the main A-plot, it just like, Jupiter Jet and the Forgotten Radio just really kind of rolled off the tongue, kind of like one of the Indiana Jones titles. And since Jupiter Jet takes a lot of inspiration from adventure serials, it just felt like the right way to go.
I will also, maybe to tease the listeners a little bit, say that since that is the title that we elected to go with, and since Aaron is asking us about it, the Forgotten Radio might be a little more important than they would think at first blush in the first maybe opening quarter of the book, and it does become very, very important.
Well, yeah, it's funny because the Forgotten Radio is really the main thrust of Chuck's storyline, Jupiter Jet's little brother, her sidekick, whereas the Red Rocks are Jupiter Jet's storyline. Now, they both coalesce at the end, and both these elements will keep going in Jupiter Jet 3 and Jupiter Jet 4 or Jupiter Jet 5. I think I like the alliteration of Forgotten Radio.
It sounds cool, right? And sometimes that's one of the neat things about comics is a lot about flash and style. So sometimes it being the cool option is the right way to go. Although that's a discussion that Jason and I will have as writers quite often. Can we do this cool thing just because it's cool, or do we have to put a little more thought into it than that?
Now you said volume 4, 5. Will there be more volumes than that?
Well, if pre-orders go well, there'll be many more volumes. But we always had the plan for Jupiter Jet to be a 5-volume story, each of them, like this volume, progressing her story 1 year. So she was 16 in volume 1. That means she'll be 20. She'll be a full-grown woman of the galaxy by the end of the story. And I think that transition period in people's lives where you become an adult and you sort of onboard all of what that means is very, very interesting and very rich. And it really works with a classic hero's journey that we're unpacking within each volume and then sort of in the larger narrative. But our hopes and dreams were always to do 5 volumes. And the reason that we're doing volume 2 now is because so many readers would come up to us at conventions, at live events, on Twitter, and ask us when we were doing more. And we didn't want to wait until people stopped asking, because as a creator, the most high compliment you can receive is to have somebody want more of your work, particularly when it's an original creation.
Oh, definitely. What's the significance of calling these red rocks Fontanium?
Oh, that's a good question.
So one of the hardest things when you're writing science fiction is always to try to think of what is the fake name of the gobbledygook, or the technobabble, as they call it on Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
And it was funny because in volume 1, we had like a similar element. There were these blue spheres, and we decided to call them Verterium. And that is because that is a element from Star Trek. And I always like to put we like to put a reference to Star Trek in everything we do. And as we were finishing up Jupiter Jet and the Forgotten Radio, we got to the point in the story where we're like, we got to name the Red Rocks. Like the Red Rocks, this new element that Jupiter Jet is going to discover that's going to be the best rocket fuel that you can ever find. You know, I was like, we have to come up with whatever fake name this is, because it's obviously not a real element. And that is when famous Star Trek writer D.C. Fontana passed away. And if many people don't know, she was Gene Roddenberry's secretary on the first season of Star Trek, and she worked her way up to the writing staff in the second season. And she's considered to be basically the mother of most of the Vulcan mythology on Star Trek, because a lot of her episodes dealt with Spock, and a lot of episodes dealt with, like the history of Vulcan. Like Amok Time is an episode that she wrote, and she's a great writer. And it kind of just fell into place, kind of like the title of Forgotten Radio, where it was like, oh, this would be like the greatest thing to name this element. It would just call it Fontanium in honor of DC Fontana. And the great thing is that Fontanium is going to carry through into future volumes. So I kind of like that we're going to have this nice little wink to DC Fontana for like the rest of the series.
That's awesome.
Also, she kind of low-key looks like Jackie.
She could be Jackie's mom.
She has, she's like a nice...
Or grandma.
A nice Caucasian lady with curly red hair, and that's who Jackie is. So it kind of works on several levels. So maybe in an alternate reality, she's a relative of Jackie.
Oh, wow, that could be a prequel maybe of sorts.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, you mentioned, you sort of touched on it earlier. This newest volume seems more grown up and sophisticated. Not only is Jackie Johnson growing up, but it was also nice to see her younger brother evolve as a character, Chuck, as well.
Yeah, Chuck is so easy to just write running away with scenes and situations because he's a genius, loudmouth, pain in the butt. If you're an actual little boy listening to this, that's what you're like. Sorry to break it to you.
As a man who was a little boy, I will confirm that is true.
And we had this idea for Chuck's evolution and what his new identity that we unpack a lot in this volume, what that was going to be in our original character descriptions that we sent to our series artist, Ben Matsuya, when we were courting him originally. We wrote in this character's name. We teased it out in volume 1. We have these really early sketches of what he might look like. And that was so much fun to be able to explore and allow him to come into his identity, not only as a superhero, but as somebody separate from Jackie, because sometimes your identity really gets caught up in the people who you're with. And Chuck is also 11 now. So just the same way that Jackie's about to leave her teens, he's just entering them. And so he's going through a very similar evolution to her, but with a lot more snark and a way crappier costume.
That's right. He does become his own hero called Saturn Scout.
That's right. That's an OG pitch. That's from like our very first meeting in a diner.
I also want to say that, like, if eagle-eyed readers remember, there's a Batman Forever homage. Now, I know most people are like, why are you doing a Batman Forever homage? Look, back in the day, when that's the only superhero movies we had, I love Batman Forever. And I still kind of do. But anyways, in Jupiter Jet Volume 1, in the very first issue, there's a moment where Chuck builds the initial version of his little blast belt that looks like the rings of Saturn. And there's a scene where he starts throwing out superhero names. Now, that's a reference to when Chris O'Donnell in Batman Forever, he leans into Batman. He's like, oh, what should I be called? Batboy, Nightwing, Sky. I don't know. Remember the third name. I think it's like Skyboy or something like that. So we have Chuck say a bunch of different names in Volume 1, and one of them is Saturn Scout.
Oh, wow. That's cool. Jupiter Jet not only encounters a new jetpack wearer, but also a new badass Praetor called Praetor Venus. Can you remind our audience what the Praetors are?
Heck yeah. So Praetor is a German military rank. And when we were creating Volume 1, the villain of the first volume is Praetor Pluto. I think smart listeners can sense a theme with our naming conventions here. And Praetor Pluto is a bad guy who is probably an alien. We don't get too much into it in the first volume, who Jackie has to overcome as she is both embracing her identity and saving her planet. And then we thought, well, if there's a Praetor Pluto, there has to be other Praetors. And we really wanted in this volume to have Jackie go up against a female villain rather than a male villain. And because we had named him Pluto, the obvious counterpoint to that is Venus. And it was really interesting when we were developing her originally. I really wanted her to look like Grace Jones because Grace Jones is the most badass version of a woman that I can conjure in my mind. And when Ben was sending us back initial character designs, he so got that. And people can see art of her online. It was included in our original Kickstarter campaign. If you know what she looks like, she's bald-headed, which is one of my favorite things about her. And Pluto was bald. So in working with Venus, we really got to build out some of these weird cultural shared elements about the Praetor culture. But she also has, I would say, a lot more depth, a lot more frightening characteristics. She's much smarter and more capable than Pluto ever was. And while she is the villain, she's also kind of the villain in name only in this volume. There's a character who Aaron knows about because he's had a chance to read this volume that listeners don't know about, who actually in a lot of ways takes on a more traditional villain role in the end.
Nice. Now, she also gets to visit a planet called Justice. How did you arrive at that name, and how happy? I'm sure Jason's happy. How happy were you that you included a Western cowboy component to the story?
Well, partner, I'll tell you that it was done. I was tickled plum pink to have a Western theme in this story. I'm a huge fan of Westerns. Growing up on like Saturday and Sunday afternoons, I would always like watch Westerns with my dad and my family and stuff like that. So Westerns, I feel, are kind of like superheroes, kind of like comic books, especially superhero comic books. They're something that are very uniquely American. Now they've been adopted by many cultures, but they are like an American storytelling method. And so anytime I can like get or write a Western into something, I kind of will. And I had this idea. We'd never talked about this, but when we were talking about the idea, I said to Ashley, I was like, I have this image of Jackie with a cowboy hat and a duster riding some sort of like lizard creature across a desert. And I was like, I don't know how this is going to fit because obviously Jackie's home planet of Europa is not that type of place. So we decided that we had to send her to her first new planet. So she travels to her first new planet, and it's called Justice, and it's like an old Western town. And when we were thinking about the naming conventions of this, we discovered that the 1903 film, The Great Train Robbery, is kind of considered to be the first Western of all time. It's a silent film, and the film ends with this cowboy firing his gun right at camera. And when they originally showed that film, everybody was scared and they ran. And the name of that actor who played that cowboy is Justice D. Garland.
Oh, wow.
And so the name of Justice is after that actor, to me, the first film cowboy of all time.
That's awesome. You're both co-writers on this on Jupiter Jet. I mean, how did you decide to write what?
So typically we do a lot of planning when we are co-writing Jupiter Jet because Jason's a planner and I am a reluctant planner. It's so helpful when we do that, but I hate every second of planning it. But it really makes the final writing process a lot easier, and it helps keep us on the same page. Usually the way we decide is one of us will say, I really want to write this. And we go, okay. And then the other person will write the other part of it. It's not always an equal balance. It's not that if we're writing a 20-page chunk, it's not that it has to be 10 and 10. It's equitable in the sense of I am passionate about this, so I will write these scenes, and then you writing the other scenes will allow me to take that on, or vice versa. For this volume, interestingly enough, Jason wrote a lot of the Jackie storyline, and a lot of Jackie's storyline deals with some leftover feelings about her mother and her father, and her really coming into her sense of womanhood and being an adult. And it might shock people to know that Jason is not a woman, but I think he handled that very deftly. And with he wrote a lot of great emotionality into it. And I wound up taking on a lot of the Chuck stuff, and may continue to shock listeners to know that I've never been a little boy. But it's just the thing that sings to us the most is how we break up the workload. And then we come together to do rewrites. and typically we'll sit and do that together. But in terms of our process as co-writers, I actually think deciding who's going to write what is one of the easier tasks that we have to take on.
Well, it's just the idea of like just like a television writer's room, which is where my day-to-day job is the idea of generally the person that is the most passionate about the scene is probably going to be the one that's going to write the best version of the scene. So you should never force a writer to write a scene about a dog if they hate dogs. If they love cats and they're screaming about their cat all the time, then they should definitely write the cat scenes. And I think that's where we a lot of our strengths happen. That's where we broke down a lot because, I don't know. I just felt very passionate about like Jackie and everything she kind of had to deal with in this volume. And I think maybe because Ashley is younger than me, but also younger at heart, that's the reason why she landed on the 11-year-old.
Also, Chuck is the one who has a cat, and I am very passionate about my feelings for my cat. So it worked out really equitably, really nicely.
Nice. How is Brago the intern doing?
I think he's having a really hard go of it, to be completely honest. Earlier, he was sitting on our podcast table on our setup. He really likes to be up with all the wires, but I think he's a little eked out by the smoke. But he's a kept man who don't have to pay no bills, so he's doing okay.
What was the writing process during the pandemic? How different was the experience writing the second volume from the first?
We started volume 2 last year.
Yeah, we wrote like the first 40 pages of it first, and then we took a break to run the Kickstarter. And then we wrote all the way to the conclusion. So there was like a kind of like a little break. So like the first half of it was very pre-pandemic. And the second half of it, we finished in the pandemic. I mean, to be honest with you, it didn't really change that much. It just made it easier to write the second half because I wasn't commuting into an office every day. So there was a little bit more time in my day to be like, hey, you want to write this?
Yeah, more of the stuff that we've had to tackle post-pandemic has been weird production sides of it, like making sure that our other creatives are hitting their deadlines, sending furious emails to all of our friends with shows and saying, hey, friend, please let me be back on your show. And things like that, like all of the sort of things that people don't think about in terms of creating a comic book has been more of what we've had to take on post-pandemic. And in a lot of ways, like Jason says, it has been maybe weirdly streamlined because we're at home more and we have less conflicts than we would in a normal year. But in terms of really weird things like getting books shipped, getting prints made, that's been a lot harder because some businesses are working with furloughs. Some people are donating their time. Some people have restricted hours. So we are gearing up to pack our rewards in the coming weeks for the Kickstarter campaign. And I think that's where the true struggle is going to happen. But it's also kind of the most fun because you get to make all of these beautiful art packages for kind of your nearest and dearest. So we'll see.
Awesome. Why was it important for Jupiter Jet to appeal to all ages, and what inspired you to create it in the first place?
I think all comic books should appeal to all ages. Now, I obviously say that there are definitely room for mature stories like Hellblazer and Preacher and so on and so on. But I think if you're telling a comic book now in the modern world that is not accessible to adults, doesn't talk down to adults, but also is accessible to 5-year-old children, then I think you're missing a huge market because the comic books that are selling right now, the comic books that are being consumed the most are these graphic novels published by Scholastic and First Second. They're the ones that are on the New York Times bestselling. Now, we're not saying this because we wanted to go for Jupiter Jet for sales. No, we wanted Jupiter Jet to be the most accessible it could be because that's the way comic books were when I read comic books, when I grew up in comic books, and I actually read comic books, I mean, when I picked up my first issue of Batman somewhere in the early 90s, I didn't need to know anything about continuity. I didn't need to know that Alfred was dead. I didn't need to know that Batman was maybe marrying Catwoman, and no grievous murder was going to happen in that issue. It was just a pure, enjoyable, completely accessible tale. And that's the whole thought behind Jupiter Jet, is going back to that idea that anybody, your 99-year-old grandmother and your 5-year-old child, can pick up this book. There's nothing in there that will offend them. And by that, I mean there's nothing that will scare the child, but also there's nothing that will talk down to that adult. It's very much the Pixar model. And I think that is something that, especially comic books from the big two, are really missing out on right now, is that accessibility in terms of tone and just their own continuity. And I believe we told this story before. Actually, you should tell the story about where the name of Jupiter Jet came from.
So Jason and I had been pitching comics for a little while now. We were actually pitching Jupiter Jet around the same time that we were pitching Science, which is our sophomore graphic novel, Science, the Elements of Dark Energy, which is currently nominated for a Ringo Award.
Yay.
So if you are Comics Pro or Press, please go vote for it. We're going to lose to Raymond Telgemeier, but we would like to put up a fair fight. And Jupiter Jet was the one that went first, but as we alluded at the beginning of this podcast, Jason and I have a fondness for diners, and we were at a diner having lunch one day, and I leaned over and I said, I have an idea for a comic book, but it's just the name and it's Jupiter Jet, which, professionally speaking, is pretty much the worst way that you can pitch something to your collaborator or your partner with no real idea, no standing, no nothing. And I was like, it's a girl with a jetpack. And Jason was like, yes, and she has red hair, and she's on Jupiter, and she has a little brother who's a mechanic, and there's a cat. And like immediately, and the twist, the reveal at the end of Volume 1, Jason pitched in that first meeting. We came up with Saturn Scout in that first meeting, and it was like a strike of lightning. And so in hindsight, it could not have been a more perfect thing to be our first big project to go and to get published, and I'm so proud of it. But also for eagle-eyed fans, Jupiter Jet is named after, and her color scheme in Volume 1 is a little bit inspired by, although our colorist Mara Jane Carpenter definitely ran with it. She's inspired by Sailor Jupiter, who's my favorite Sailor Senshi because I love Sailor Moon. So there's definitely, it's buried deep in the Western comics conventions, but there is some magical girl inspiration in Jupiter Jet for sure, and in the tone of the jokes and stuff like that. But for me, it always begins and ends with Makoto. She's the greatest.
So is there a chance of you and Jason doing a Sailor Moon and Tuxedo Mask cosplay?
Oh, man. Jason doesn't really understand who Tuxedo Mask is. So
it's like you're speaking a different language right now.
If I was going to be fair, if I was going to cosplay as a Senshi, I would probably actually pick Mars because I'm much more like her. And, you know, she's always screaming at Sailor Moon. and it's much more my jam.
And I meant to say this earlier to your question about the Praetors. Aaron, I'm going to give Hull H an exclusive that we've never said anywhere else.
Nice.
You were asking about the Praetors, and it fits in your answer. In Volume 3, you will meet a Praetor named Praetor Mars.
Oh.
That is going to happen in Volume 3. So you've heard it here first, folks.
Nice. Can't wait. Why don't we talk about your creative team? You have a big list of collaborators here.
Yes, we like to collect talented people and bully them into working with us because that is truth about what networking is. It's taking advantage of your other friends' talents. Ben Matsuya is our series artist. He's been with us since Volume 1. He was our OG Jupiter Jet collaborator. We found Ben, and I think this is a great story for anybody who's interested in drawing comics or working in the comics art sphere. We found Ben because Ben had actually drawn a piece of fan art of Jason when Jason was working with Screen Junkies. And when we reached out to him and said, do you have sequential samples? He said, why, yes, I do. And they were pretty good. And so then, you know, we did all the boring contract work of hiring somebody to work for you. But what sequential samples means is, can you tell a moving story? Because there's a big difference between being a great pinup artist and being able to work sequentially. And so Ben was smart enough to have sequential samples. And if you are interested in creating and you've never written or drawn a comic, take another script that you like and draw your version of it. Like it's not that complicated, but it definitely has to be something you have an eye for. So Ben is returning, which is really, really great. And it's been really fun to see his style bloom and grow and evolve over these couple years and take on different aspects. Like he can do a lot more traditionally sci-fi things here, whereas Volume 1, I think, was much more of what if Ben did a period piece. And then we have a new colorist, because our original colorist, who I mentioned earlier, Mara, is very booked and blessed. So we're happy for her. And we brought on one of her proteges at her recommendations, Elizabeth Kramer. And man, Liz got it right away. And she was crushing it from like page one. With colorists, sometimes you'll do trial pages, or you'll make sure that they can complement the line art in a way that you are looking for. And she just got it from go. So I could not be more thrilled to have her and to have more lady energy on our lady stories. And then our letterer, Taylor Esposito, is returning from Volume 1, and we have some additional design work from Carlos Mangual. And Carlos is an incredible designer and letterer in his own right, who we got hot off of a long, long run at DC Comics. So interestingly enough, if you hold up our entire creative team, our letterer and designers are real superstars, are real heavy hitters on the team. They've worked on Superman and Nightwing and all of these
and Red Hood and the Outlaws.
Incredible, projects. And then, graciously came and worked on our little book as well. So, I mean, we're so lucky to have such an incredible creative team. And when you have great collaborators, it makes the whole storytelling process, even the not fun parts, a lot more fun. And I think it translates onto the page as well.
Mm-hmm. Not to mention a snazzy cover by John Boy Myers.
Oh yes, well John Boy is here's a fun personal story. John Boy is somebody that Jason and I have both admired for a very, very long time. And so getting to work with him has been very surreal, because John Boy and Nicholas Scott, who also has given us 2 prints as well, they're our most seasoned team members, and it's wild to work with 2 masters. Like everything that they give you is just perfect, and you're like, I wouldn't even presume to give you a note. And John Boy did our cover for Volume 1. He has done our cover for Volume 2 as well. And my favorite detail about the cover is obviously Jackie is in her new costume. She's posed. It's very dynamic. We can sort of reveal the space of it all on this cover. But she's holding up 2 fingers, which is cute because it is a very magical girl, Japanese-inspired peace sign. But it's also Volume 2. Like that's genius, because we didn't give him any instructions. We said, whatever you want will be amazing. And it was totally amazing. And John Boy was very silly, because we said, well, we'll have you do covers for every volume. And he said, that's great. And so now he's stuck with us forever.
Awesome. I guess we'll take a break and we'll do a Thunder Round. What would a Hall H show be without a Thunder Round, right? My first question is, what's your favorite flavor of ice cream?
Vanilla.
Coffee.
Ooh, I've been loving vanilla lately myself. I didn't like vanilla as a kid, but I think now that I'm older, I have a newfound appreciation for it.
The classics are always the best.
Mm-hmm. In Jupiter Jet, there is a resistance group called the Children of Gaia. If you were part of the Children of Gaia, would you tell the people of Europa that they weren't on Earth?
Oh,
No.
that's really hard. By the end of Volume 2, maybe.
If you could go back in time, what would you tell your 15-year-old selves?
Be nicer to your parents.
Oh, that's tough. Oh man. I would say there's some really good comics in your future.
What are some cool shows that you've watched during the pandemic?
Grand Designs.
We discovered this UK show called Grand Designs, which is about crazy British people designing crazy British houses, and it's been our delight of the pandemic. That and Perry Mason on HBO.
Oh, and
wow.
Schitt's Creek.
Yeah.
The good Canadian content, because I am a Canadian, so you got to have some CBC show has to be in the rotation.
Cool. What's one thing your fans would be surprised to learn about you?
Oh, that's so hard.
I mean, the easiest thing that probably people would probably be very surprised to learn about me is that like I'm very hands-on. Like I fix things on my car, and I'm also a very skilled carpenter. I build furniture.
Oh, I will say how short I am, because people always say that when they meet me in real life. They're like, I didn't realize how small you were. I have a big personality.
There you go. What was the last song you sang in the shower?
Yorktown from Hamilton, doing every single part by myself.
I think it's usually something from Pippin, and it's like, think about the sun, Pippin.
We're a musical theater household, clearly.
Nice. If you could teleport to anywhere in the world right now, where would you go, and why did you pick that place?
Oh, I want to go to Nicholas Scott's house.
I was gonna say Australia, so that counts.
She said we could stay there, and she's got a really cool cat, and we haven't seen her or Craig this year. So
Craig is her husband.
Yeah,
but
an amazing writer
also a comic
his own
writer.
right.
Australia is like the one place in the world I haven't seen yet, and I really it's just such a conflux of all these amazing geography and biology and creatures and stuff like that. So that's why I would want to go to Australia.
Remember when Australia was on fire and we thought that was going to be the craziest thing that happened this year? Now we're on fire.
That was in January, which is a decade ago.
If you weren't a writer, what would you be?
I wanted to be a zoologist for a really long time and study great apes when I was a little kid.
I'd either be a teacher or a lawyer, because I started the process for both before I moved out to Los Angeles.
Oh, cool. In Shazam, Barry Batson yells Shazam to transform into a superhero. What word would you use to transform into a superhero, and what kind of powers would you have?
That's a good question.
These are difficult questions for the Thunder Round.
I would shout Maple Leaf, and I would turn into basically Wolverine.
I think I would yell Shazbot, and give me Superman's powers.
Cool. That's awesome. Let's talk about maybe the business of being a creator. I guess my first question is, why do you both create?
Because we can't do anything else.
Speak for yourself.
The only reason to become a creator professionally is if it's the only thing that's going to sustain you in some way, because at every point it's going to be way harder, way more complicated, and way more frustrating than you expect it to. Jason and I are basically small business owners, and let me assure you, we do not have business degrees, but you want to do it well, and you want to do well for all of your supporters on Kickstarter, in the press, people who just come up to you. So you try to do it as best as you can. And creating is, I guess it's more of a compulsion than anything else. You do it because you have to. And the business side of it, you'll figure out, again, because you have to. And it's easier now than it ever was before, because we are sort of in this glorious age of the freelancer right now, where you can create whatever you want and you can work to build the infrastructure around it if you care to, if you have the time and the will and the drive, and we have the internet. Like, I can't imagine trying to publish independent comic books in the 60s or in the 80s or even in the 90s.
We had to go to Kinko's and just print them all out.
And like hand them out in a convention hall. Like, we're so #blessed to have all the resources that we have. But, out of the opposite side of my mouth, because it's easier than ever, I think you have to work a lot harder to stand out. And so that kind of goes back to the gratefulness that we feel that anybody is at all interested in our work to begin with, and that people were asking for us to do more of it.
When it comes to marketing, and seeing as how your creators, have you found the pitching and promoting part of the business hard?
It's very hard because we all grow up seeing advertising. We all grow up seeing people on talk shows talking about their movies, famous people. We see people promoting their books on morning shows. And we're kind of taught to just talk about the thing. And especially when you're starting out, or especially in comic books, people aren't buying the comic book because they love the comic book. Now, in certain cases, that is true because people will buy Batman just because it's Batman. But in most cases, they're buying the person, the creator behind the thing. They're not buying the thing. Like anybody listening right now, if they pick up Jupiter Jet, they're going to pick it up because they like us, not because they, or they're just really into jetpacks. But mainly for us, like we're going to be the deal. So in terms of marketing, I think a lot of it is that how do you market yourself through the book? And sometimes it's a very hard thing to figure out.
It's also, this is going to sound weird, but it's hard to come up with something original to say because we are gearing up to our final order cutoff. And before that, we were gearing up to our initial orders. And then we will be gearing up to when the book launches. And then we will be gearing up to our first in-person event, whether that's 6 months from now, a year from now, 2.5 years from now. And so the way you talk about your work and the way that you attempt to reach other audiences, because you're always trying to dip your foot in other people's ponds, is going to change and evolve over that time. And for us, the book has been done for a long time, but for other people, it's brand new. And that it's a challenging, but it's also a very fun thing to traverse because you can tease things that are going to pay off, but then it will surprise you what other people talk about. Like, Aaron, you asked us about the Children of Gaia. We did an other interview where somebody asked us about the Children of Gaia, and they were a part of Volume 1, and no one asked us about them. So, like, that's been an interesting thing for me to learn. Like, oh, that's something people are interested in. Okay, got it. Cool. We'll talk about them some more.
You mentioned Kickstarter earlier. What are some tips to help your Kickstarter become successful?
The biggest tip, and I say this to so many people, and so many people don't listen to me. This is the most important tip about Kickstarter. I don't care what product you're putting on Kickstarter. Your goal number needs to be realistic. I see so many campaigns where people go to Kickstarter and they're like, I'm going to ask for $40,000. And I'll say, well, how many books have you written before? 0? But this is my first. And I'm like, you're going to fail because nobody knows who you are. They don't trust you. So be very realistic about the goal, because the trick of Kickstarter is to fund. It doesn't matter what your amount is, it's to fund, because the people that back you, your backers, are 9 times out of 10 likely, if you successfully fund, to follow you to a new campaign and another campaign and another campaign, and that is if you deliver a quality product. But it is just like creating a customer base in any other industry. So you have to look at it at that. It's like you're trying to get as many people through the door as you can before you shut the door. You have a 1-month period on Kickstarter. And you need to think about your Kickstarter like a pop-up event. Like you only have a month to sell that product. How many can you sell? And then the next time you're going to come do your pop-up event or your second Kickstarter, ask for a little bit more. Maybe keep the doors open a little bit longer. See, and it's just generally and systematically increasing. But most people come out the gate asking for this ridiculous amount. And what that does to most customers on Kickstarter is they see that amount and they're like, you'll never fund. And they automatically will not back you. Whereas if they look at your amount and you're pretty close to it, or you're halfway there, or, this is day one and they can see the number skyrocketing, they'll be like, oh yeah, this will fund. I'm going to click in, because people want a guarantee. And that is the gamble of Kickstarter. Even with Kickstarter, people want the guarantee that they're going to get the thing that you're selling.
I think you said a key word, trust. I think you've garnered a lot of trust through your podcast, Geek History Lesson. I mean, it's one of my favorite podcasts to listen to.
Oh, thank you, dude. That's very kind words.
I'm sorry about all the times we scream.
Maybe we can talk about your podcast a little bit.
Please.
Yeah. Maybe talk us about the origin story about the podcast.
Jason and I were thinking about doing a podcast for a while when we started it back in 2014, when I thought everybody had a podcast until Conan O'Brien invented podcasting in 2019. And we were literally talking about, can you imagine how insane it would actually be to be Robin? Because we both love Robin and various Robin characters. And we were like just laughing so hard about all the poisons that Batman would make you try and how long you would have to hold your breath underwater. And we were like, oh, like everybody with a bit of an ego, you go, we should do a podcast. We're really funny. And Jason's goal was always, and is with a lot of the things that we create, to make sure that there is an educational component to it, that's the value that we see in a lot of media. And so that's how we landed on the Geek History Lesson. The ethos of that, the formatting came a little bit later. And then we spent like another month trying to come up with a name. And eventually we just called it what it was, which is Geek History Lesson. And now we've made almost 350 episodes. So we're doing something kind of right.
That's awesome. I guess we can start closing out the show. Did we miss anything? Is there anything else that you'd like our audience to know about concerning Jupiter Jet?
The only thing that I would want to know, or want them to know about Jupiter Jet, is that anybody who's listening to this podcast obviously trusts Hall H and they trust Aaron. You, Aaron, have read the book. We gave it to you early. We snuck you a copy through the gates. So I want to ask you, what do you think about Jupiter Jet and the Forgotten Radio? Because you've also read Volume 1. What did you think of the sequel?
Oh, I love the sequel. I could tell there was a remarkable change in tone. It seems like, as I said earlier, it was a change in sophistication in the storytelling, and I think it just felt more put together. The colors, I even though I guess you have a new colorist, they were able to still retain the feel from the first one. It's definitely still a book that conveys happiness and optimism. And even when there is a conflict, you're still hopeful that our heroine and her cohorts will pull through. So I think
nice.
That's my impression so far.
Well, see, then that's the only thing we need to say about Jupiter Jet and the Forgotten Radio. It's Hall H approved.
Yeah.
Which means the world to us.
Definitely. And not only that, but I really look up to you guys and respect both of you very much as creators and fellow podcasters and as people.
Oh, thank you, dude.
Oh, Aaron, that's so sweet.
Are there any superhero shoutouts that you'd like to give out?
We'd be very remiss without giving some love to Charlie Stickney.
Oh, yeah,
who
definitely
is also a great Kickstarter, and now he works over at Scout Comics because, anytime we're able to give some advice, that's very helpful. And also Jupiter Jet and the Forgotten Radio also has kind of two giant creators that helped us out a lot when we were working on the second volume and doing stuff like that. And that is the astounding Carl Kessel and the amazing Ron Randall, who are legends in their own right, who really, really made sure and helped us with the funding of Volume 2 in a lot of important ways.
And Jupiter Jet, The Forgotten Radio is available on previews and on pre-order. Can you also remind our audience why it's important to pre-order the book?
Heck yeah. So final order caught up is September 15th. I don't know when this podcast is coming out, so I'm going to pretend like that is in your future.
I will put it up tomorrow. So
perfect. Okay, great. It's coming. Final order cutoff is September 14th. I think
And
it's
even-
technically September 14th.
And even if you miss final order cutoff, you can still pre-order the book.
Absolutely. But pre-orders with independent comics in particular do a lot when your publisher is looking at your initial sales in their decision-making process about whether or not the book is going to be coming back, whether or not they're interested in taking the financial risk of printing the book and of marketing and all of those things. And so pre-orders are very important in shaping the future. So if you have liked our previous work, if you liked us chatting today, if you like Sailor Moon, please go and pre-order Jupiter Jet and the Forgotten Radio. It will help us tell more stories in the future. Also, Jason and I are running a pre-order contest. So if you pre-ordered Jupiter Jet and the Forgotten Radio, whether that was on Kickstarter, whether that was through BackerKit, whether that's from your LCS, whether that is from Barnes & Noble, wherever you get your fine graphic novels, if you send a proof of your purchase to jupiterjetcomic@gmail.com, we're doing a amazing contest giveaway. And the grand prize is you get a character in Volume 3 named after you. So there's a few days left to enter that. So get that into us.
That sounds incredible.
I think so.
What are the best places to reach you online?
So I like to be very easy to find online. So you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Ashley V. Robinson. The V is very important. Jupiter Jet has a Twitter account at Jupiter Jet Comics. She follows back. So go ahead and check that out. Geek History Lesson is available where all fine podcasts are had. So I know you're subscribed to Hall H. So why not just hop over and subscribe to Geek History Lesson as well? Or it's on Twitter at GHL Podcast. And Jason is everywhere as Jawin. That's Jawin. Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. Go follow it and send him cool pictures.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jason and Ashley, for coming on the show. I can't wait to podcast and eat pancakes with you at a diner, hopefully in the near future.
Hopefully for Volume 3.
I know. Thank you for having us. Thank you for letting me crash today. Aaron, you know that you are a joy in our lives. Stay safe, and I can't wait to see you.
Likewise. Thank you so much for tuning into the Hall H Show podcast, where we love showcasing independent creators like Jason Inman and Ashley Victoria Robinson. If you believe in our mission to be the voice of independent creators, we would love a rating, hopefully 5 stars, and a comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, please share our episodes using the hashtag HallHShow. Peace, cheers, and remember, representation matters. If you would like to recommend a guest for our show, please reach out to us on any of our social media accounts or our website, hallh.com.